Narrated by Gryx, 3rd rank field observer, Thurvian Imperial Fleet, assigned to document the annihilation of humanity, a job that did not go as planned. Let me be very clear about something before I begin. I did not want this assignment. When Admiral Pelzar called me into his command chamber aboard the Thurvian Flagship, the Sovereign Fang, and told me I would be the official recorder for what he described as, quote, the swift and total extermination of the human species, I smiled, nodded, and immediately went back to my quarters to update my will. Not because I thought we would lose. No. We were not going to lose. The math was perfect. The numbers were glorious. 53 Thurvian warships, 18 Velcon support cruisers, 9 Moroccan siege platforms, and enough firepower to scrape a planet clean of atmosphere in under 6 minutes. Humanity had what? 14 warships, 11 of which were, according to our intelligence reports, so old that 3 of them still used combustion-based secondary engines. Combustion, as in fire, as in the same principle used by primitive civilizations to roast meat over a pile of burning wood. No, I updated my will because I had heard stories. My grandmother, rest her membrane, used to say, Gryx, never trust a species that laughs during a fight. She said this specifically because she had once watched a recorded transmission of 2 human soldiers getting shot at by a Cathari pulse rifle, which, I want to emphasize, dissolves organic material down to its base atomic components, and these 2 soldiers ducked behind a wall, looked at each other, and started laughing. Not the panicked, desperate laughter of creatures who had accepted death. The genuine bright, this is the funniest thing that has ever happened to me laughter of beings who were having the time of their lives. My grandmother said she never recovered from watching that transmission. She slept with 3 security locks on her door for the remaining 40 years of her life. I thought about her as Admiral Pelzar spread the holographic battle map across the command table, his 4 primary arms gesturing grandly at the cluster of dots that represented the human fleet, gathered in a defensive formation around a planet they called Tyrant's Hold, a colony world. Mostly agricultural, mostly peaceful, mostly populated by human settlers who grew food and raised livestock, and apparently did not particularly care that an empire of 80 billion beings had just declared them a suitable territory for absorption. They will not fight, Pelzar said, with the kind of absolute certainty that always precedes disaster. The humans are pragmatic. They will see the numbers, they will calculate the odds, and they will surrender. We will be home by the 3rd moon cycle. Our fleet commander, a broad-shouldered Thurvian named Brecken, cracked his jaw plates in what passed for a confident smile. And if they do not surrender? Pelzar waved a dismissive limb. Then we eliminate their fleet in under 40 minutes. Our projections show a 94.7% casualty rate on their side within the first exchange of fire. They have nowhere to run. Tyrant's Hold has only one viable jump corridor, and our Moroccan platforms will seal it the moment we arrive. I wrote all of this down in my field recorder, very carefully, very precisely. I also wrote a small personal note at the bottom of the page that said, things that have a 94.7% chance of going perfectly fine, 0. Throughout all of recorded Thurvian history, 0. But nobody asked for my personal notes, so we arrived at the edge of the Tyrant system at 0400, ship standard time. I was in the observation gallery, which is a fancy name for a glass-paneled room full of junior officers and administrative personnel who were important enough to watch but not important enough to have a role in what was about to happen. My colleague, a young Velcon analyst named Quell 9, stood beside me, vibrating with excitement. Velcon express enthusiasm through a low-frequency hum in their chest cavity, and I want you to understand that Quell 9 was humming so hard that the observation gallery windows were faintly rattling. This is incredible, Quell 9 said. A historic moment. The final inclusion of the human territories into the Thurvian framework. I am going to write a paper about this. I am going to write 3 papers. Wonderful, I said, watching the stars shift as we dropped out of faster-than-light travel. There they were, 14 human warships, arranged in a formation our tactical computers recognized as a concave defensive arc, positioned between our fleet and the planet. Tyrant's Hold glowed blue and green and soft behind them, completely unaware, presumably, that today might be the last ordinary day its inhabitants ever experienced. The human ships were, well, they looked exactly like everything our intelligence reports had described. Old, dented. The Flagship, which our records identified as the ISV Relentless, was a mid-class carrier that had been built 60 years ago and had clearly been repaired so many times that at least 40% of its hull plating was made from different materials than the original design. It looked, and I mean this with full sincerity, like something a young child had built by gluing together pieces from several different toy kits, none of which matched. "Look at that thing," Quell9 said, still humming, pointing at the Relentless. "Our flagship could eat that ship for a light snack." "It probably could," I agreed. The standard procedure in these situations is what we call the Declaration of Terms. Thurvian Imperial Protocol requires that we offer the target population one opportunity to surrender before we begin operations. It is considered dignified, civilized, a courtesy that demonstrates our philosophical superiority over the species we are about to conquer. Admiral Pelzar opened the Universal Communication Channel. The channel crackled, hissed, resolved into clarity. "Human fleet," Pelzar said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had done this approximately 30 times before without incident. "You are addressed by Admiral Pelzar Drovak of the Thurvian Imperial First Armada. You have been declared a territory of interest under the Thurvian Expansion Mandate, Section 14. You have 15 minutes to lower your shields, broadcast a formal declaration of surrender to all frequencies, and begin evacuation of non-essential personnel to your surface colonies, where they will be processed under standard absorption protocols. You will not be harmed, so long as compliance is." A voice cut through the communication channel. Not a response to the surrender demand, just a voice, calm, female, with the kind of tone that suggested its owner was mildly inconvenienced, the way you might sound if someone had rung your doorbell during dinner. "This is Commander Voss Calloway of the ISV Relentless, representing the Tyrant Defense Coalition. I received your transmission. Give me a moment." Silence. Pelzar blinked all four of his eyes. "Give me a moment," he repeated. Quell9 had stopped humming. The silence stretched for roughly 30 seconds, which, in an interstellar standoff context, is approximately 9,000 years. I found myself holding my breath. Every being in the observation gallery had gone completely still. Even the ventilation system seemed quieter than usual. Then Commander Calloway came back on the channel. "Right," she said. "I have reviewed your terms. My answer is no, we will be keeping the planet. And you should know, for what it's worth, that we have prepared several surprises for your fleet that I think will be very educational. Nothing personal. This is just how we do things. Relentless out." The channel closed. Complete silence on the bridge of the Sovereign Fang. Total, absolute silence. I could hear the soft electrical hum of our ship's systems. I could hear Quell9 slowly exhale. I could hear my own heartbeats, all three of them slightly out of rhythm, because I had just listened to the commander of 14 outdated warships, facing the most powerful armada the Thurvian Empire had deployed in 40 years, tell us that she had prepared several surprises and that it was nothing personal. "Nothing personal," Brecken repeated slowly, as if tasting the words to determine whether they were toxic. Admiral Pelzar straightened. "Combat formation. Begin the approach. Standard engagement protocol. Target their flagship first and let the rest of them watch. This will be over quickly." And here is where I want to stop and explain something to anyone reading this account, because what happened next is something that, in all my years as a field observer, in all my decades of documenting military operations across 6 different wars, I have never, not once, seen before. As our fleet began to move, as 53 Thurvian warships shifted into combat formation, and the Moroccan siege platforms began to charge their primary weapons, Commander Calloway opened the communication channel one more time. Just one sentence. "All Tyrant Defense Coalition forces, radio silence, now," and then, nothing. No transmissions, no tactical chatter, no emergency communications between the 14 human ships. Nothing. Our communication intercept systems, which are extremely sophisticated, designed to capture even encrypted signals down to low-band background radiation levels, picked up absolutely zero communication from the human fleet. Their ships were flying in silence, moving into new positions in silence, adjusting their formation in silence. "They have gone to signal blackout," our communications officer, a young Moroccan named Tevrak, reported, his voice carrying a very slight tremor that he was obviously trying to suppress. "All human vessels are operating under full communication suppression. Tactical advantage? None," Brecken said, studying his screens. "They cannot coordinate effectively without communications. This works in our favor." "Does it?" I asked, quietly, mostly to myself, because nobody in this room wanted to hear my thoughts on the subject. Here is what I was thinking. I had studied 64 military conflicts involving human forces. In 41 of those conflicts, humans had been outmatched. In 39 of those 41 conflicts, The outmatched humans had found a way to even the score, the consistent factor in 37 of those 39 situations. The humans had done something that was not predicted by any tactical model, not accounted for in any strategic projection, and not remotely rational by the standards of any other known species. Commander Calloway had just ordered her people to go silent. That was deliberate. That was a signal, not to her ships, not to us. That was a signal to whatever she had arranged beforehand. A pre-planned, pre-coordinated sequence of events that required no further communication because every piece was already in place. She had not reacted to our arrival with surprise. She had not scrambled her forces into an emergency defensive posture. She had reviewed our terms calmly, declined them politely, promised us educational surprises, and then closed the channel like someone who had set up a birthday party 3 days ago and was simply waiting for the guests to walk through the door. "Admiral," I said. Pelzar did not look at me. "Observer, this is not your domain." "With respect, Admiral," I said, "the humans have positioned 3 of their ships at angles that do not correspond to standard defensive parameters. Ship designations ISV Copper Dawn, ISV Ferris, and the older vessel they are calling ISV Grandma's Grudge." Several officers turned to look at me. "That is actually what they named it," I said. "I am not embellishing. Our records confirm the vessel registry, ISV Grandma's Grudge. Commissioned 48 years ago, currently piloted by a human named Captain Orlan Fitch, who is 67 years old and described in intelligence reports as aggressively unwilling to retire. The point is, those 3 ships are not in defensive positions. They are in positions that would make sense if something was already in motion before we arrived." Brecken finally looked at me. "What kind of something?" "I do not know," I said honestly, "but the Copper Dawn is sitting at an angle that suggests it is not facing us. It is facing empty space, 11 degrees above the ecliptic plane. There is nothing there, which means either its captain is incompetent or its captain knows something is going to be there." 3 seconds of silence. Then Tevrak, the communications officer, said, very quietly, "Admiral, I am detecting something. Multiple somethings. Heat signatures, emerging from the asteroid field on the eastern edge of the system. They were cold before. They were cold so our sensors did not register them. But they are warming up now." "How many?" Pelzar asked. Tevrak's silence lasted just a fraction too long. "Tevrak," Pelzar said sharply, "how many signatures?" 46. Tevrak said, "Sir, now, I want you to understand the layout of the room at this moment, because atmosphere matters when you are recording history." Admiral Pelzar was standing at the center of the command table. Brecken was to his right. 12 senior officers were arranged around the periphery of the bridge. In the observation gallery, separated by a transparent partition, were approximately 30 administrative personnel and junior staff, including myself and Quell 9. When Tevrak said 46, every single being in both rooms went completely still, because we had arrived with 80 warships. Humanity, according to every piece of intelligence we possessed, had 14. 46, Pelzar repeated. "Yes, Admiral, and they are not human design." Tevrak was pulling data rapidly, his secondary arms flying across his control surfaces. The configuration matches Solvan Free State vessels, and Kethari mercenary-class fighters, and what appears to be 2 Dravkan heavy cruisers. The Dravkan haven't been seen in active combat in 15 years, Brecken said. "The humans apparently found them," I said, before I could stop myself. Everyone looked at me again. "The humans," I said slowly, piecing it together even as I spoke, "did not just gather their own fleet. They gathered allies, species that the Thurvian Empire has previously displaced, conquered, or offended. They assembled them in that asteroid field days or weeks before we arrived. They hid them with cold-running engines and passive systems, and Commander Calloway, when she took our surrender demand, reviewed her terms calmly because she already knew the answer. She was not reviewing our terms, she was double-checking the clock. The observation gallery was now so quiet that I could hear the blood moving through my own head. "How long have they been in that asteroid field?" Pelzar asked Tevrak. "Energy decay patterns suggest 6 to 8 standard days, Admiral. 6 to 8 days. They had been waiting for us for 6 to 8 days. In an asteroid field, running cold, eating whatever food they had packed, keeping radio silence, telling their crews to sit still and wait and trust the plan. And their crews had, because Commander Voss Calloway had asked them to." "New numbers," Brecken said, his voice noticeably more careful than before. 60 warships now combined with the 14 in formation against our 80. The Moroccan platforms, someone started. The Moroccan platforms are siege weapons, I interrupted. They are designed to bombard fixed targets, stationary positions, planetary installations. If those 60 ships are coordinated and fast, the Moroccan platforms will be the first things destroyed because they are the least maneuverable elements in our formation. Pelzar stared at me with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering his opinion of field observers. Those ships, Tevrak said, are moving now, all 60, in formation. And they appear to be in pre-arranged formation, subgroups, coordinated attack wings, without any current communication between them. Without any current communication, because they had planned this before. Because Commander Calloway had given the order for silence, and every ship in her coalition already knew their role, their route, their target, their contingency for their contingency, because the silence was not a weakness. The silence was the proof that everything had already been decided. The silence meant they did not need to talk anymore. The talking was done. Now was the time for the part that came after talking. Admiral, Brecken said. I see it, Pelzar said. What are your orders, sir? Pelzar Drovak, Admiral of the Thurvian Imperial First Armada, commanding the most powerful military force the Empire had deployed in 4 decades, a being who had fought in 6 wars and won 5 of them, stood at his command table and stared at a holographic map showing 60 ships emerging from an asteroid field in perfect silent formation, having decided this outcome before we had even arrived. Battle stations, he said. All units, battle stations. Moroccan platforms, begin evasive repositioning. Combat wings break formation and engage at will. This is now, and that is when the Copper Dawn, the Ferris, and the ISV Grandma's Grudge, which had been sitting at those strange off-angle positions facing seemingly empty space, opened fire. Not at us. They opened fire at something we had not seen yet, something that had been even more carefully hidden than the asteroid field fleet, something so cold and so still that even our upgraded sensors had dismissed it as background scatter. The space 11 degrees above the ecliptic lit up. 4 human vessels, unmarked, broadcasting no signals, running on minimal power, had positioned themselves directly above our fleet's primary formation at an angle that made them functionally invisible to sensors looking outward from the system rather than inward and above. They were not military vessels. Our computers, cycling through recognition databases in frantic milliseconds, identified them as modified civilian haulers, cargo ships, the kind of vessels that transport grain and machine parts between colony worlds. They should not have been weapons. They were not designed to be weapons. The humans had modified them anyway. Each of those 4 converted haulers carried what I would later learn the humans called a mass driver, a weapon concept so old and so primitive that no advanced civilization had used it in centuries because advanced civilizations had advanced weapons. A mass driver is, in the most basic possible terms, a device that uses electromagnetic acceleration to fling extremely large, extremely heavy objects at extremely high speeds. It is not energy-based. It cannot be deflected by most standard shield configurations because most standard shield configurations are calibrated for energy weapons. It is not sophisticated. It is not elegant. It is not the product of cutting-edge military science. It is, however, extremely effective if you drop a 4,000-ton ferrous rock on something from directly above. The first Moroccan siege platform did not explode. Explosions require energy release. What happened to that first Moroccan siege platform was closer to what happens when you place a ceramic cup on a hard floor and then put a large boot on top of it. There was a compression sound that our sensors registered as a massive acoustic event, even through the vacuum, transmitted through the structure of nearby ships, and then the Moroccan platform simply was not a platform anymore. It was a debris field. The second rock hit before anyone had finished processing the first one. I will admit, and I am recording this for posterity with full professional honesty, that I sat down on the floor of the observation gallery. My legs just decided that this was a reasonable response to current events, and I agreed with them. Quell 9 grabbed my shoulder. Gryx! Gryx! I see it, I said. They destroyed a Moroccan platform with a rock. 2, I said. They have destroyed 2 Moroccan platforms, with rocks. Yes. How did they even... They planned it, I said. 6 to 8 days ago, they planned it. They calculated our approach vector. They calculated where our fleet would position. They put those ships above the ecliptic knowing exactly where our siege platforms would be. And when Commander Calloway said silence, the haulers knew that meant it was time. The battle had started approximately 40 seconds ago. In those 40 seconds, the Thurvian Imperial First Armada had lost 2 of its 9 siege platforms and had simultaneously discovered that 60 Allied vessels were emerging from an asteroid field in coordinated attack formation, while 4 converted cargo ships rained geological ammunition down from above. In those same 40 seconds, the 14 human warships in the original defensive arc had not moved. They had not fired a single shot. They were just sitting there, in their original formation, watching. Why aren't they engaging? Brecken was shouting at his tactical officers. The human front line, why aren't they? Admiral, a different officer this time, a Thurvian named Gelt, whose entire secondary arm had been clutching the edge of her console since the second siege platform went down. I have identified the ISV Relentless's current weapons lock orientation. Where is she targeting? Gelt was very quiet for a moment. Us, she said. The Relentless is targeting this ship. Has been since before the battle started. She has been holding weapons lock on the Sovereign Fang since approximately the moment we dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The bridge was very, very still. She locked on to our flagship the instant we arrived. Brecken said. Yes, sir. And she has not fired. No, sir. She is watching us, I said, from my position on the floor of the observation gallery, where I had decided to stay because the floor seemed like a very reasonable place to be. She is watching to see what Admiral Pelzar decides to do. If we turn our primary weapons on the civilian population of Turin's hold, if we attempt to retreat through the jump corridor, or if we attempt to use the remaining siege platforms against anything other than military targets, I believe she will fire. Silence. She is controlling the shape of this battle, I continued, without moving her ship at all. The 60 allies are handling our fleet. The haulers are handling our siege platforms. The front line is sitting there as a reminder that if we try anything that the commander has pre-decided is unacceptable, the Relentless is right there, ready, and she has been aimed at our command ship since before the shooting started. Pelzar turned to look at me through the transparent partition separating the observation gallery from the command bridge. He looked at me for a long time. You, he said finally, are a very troublesome field observer. I am an accurate field observer, I said. The trouble is entirely external to me. Outside the Sovereign Fang's viewports, the battle was accelerating. The 60 Allied ships were not fighting like a single unified force with central command and constant communication. They were fighting like 60 groups of one, each executing a pre-planned maneuver with terrifying precision, adapting to circumstances using their own judgment within a framework that had obviously been drilled into them in the days they spent hiding in that asteroid field. They did not need Commander Calloway to tell them what to do in the moment. She had already told them, days ago. In a briefing room somewhere, on some ship, she had stood in front of crews representing at least 6 different species, some of whom probably did not even share a common language with each other, and she had explained exactly how this was going to go, and they had believed her. That was the part that I kept coming back to, even as the Sovereign Fang began taking fire from a Solvan destroyer on our port side, even as Brecken started shouting new orders and the bridge erupted into organized but genuine panic. That was the part that my grandmother would have understood, I think, better than any tactical analysis. They had believed her. A human commander with 14 ships had looked at allies from 6 different species that had their own grievances and their own pride and their own military traditions, and she had said, "Trust me, here is the plan. Go sit in an asteroid field and wait. Do not talk. When the silence comes you will know." And they had gone, and they had waited, and when the silence came they had moved. Not because Commander Voss Calloway had some unprecedented tactical genius that no other military mind in history had possessed, but because she was the kind of person that beings believed, the kind of person that made sitting in cold silence in an asteroid field feel like a reasonable, sensible thing to do, because if she said this was the plan, then the plan was sound, and the silence was purposeful, and the thing at the end of the silence was going to be something worth sitting still for. A third Moroccan siege platform ceased to exist. I watched the debris expanding outward on the viewport sensors and wrote in my field recorder, "The battle for Turin's hold has been ongoing for approximately 4 minutes. Thurvian losses, 3 siege platforms destroyed, 14 combat vessels taking active fire, 2 combat vessels registering critical hull damage. Human and coalition losses, 3 vessels taking minor fire. 1 vessel registry ISV Grandma's Grudge appears to have been hit by a Thurvian energy burst and is reporting minor damage to it." I paused. Somewhere in the battle, on a 67-year-old ship piloted by a 67-year-old human who had refused to retire, something had just caught fire. A small, inefficient, combustion-based secondary engine, almost certainly a backup system for the backup system, was now burning. I wrote, ISV Grandma's Grudge Captain. Designation Orlin Fitch has just opened a localized radio channel, apparently not caring about the silence order for the purposes of this specific communication. He has broadcast, on a frequency we can detect, the following statement to his crew. Number 2 engine is on fire again. She will be fine, ignore it. Keep shooting, I am not dying today because of that engine. That engine has been trying to kill me for 22 years, and it can try again some other time. I read that back. I wrote a note beneath it. Captain Orlin Fitch is apparently still on speaking terms with his damaged engine. The engine seems to be losing this argument. And then, from somewhere in the battle, over a frequency that was partially picked up by our monitoring systems, there was laughter. Not from one ship, from multiple ships. Human laughter, the real kind, the kind my grandmother had described, bright and genuine and fully committed to the present moment, drifting through the communication static like it had every right to be there. The kind of laughter that says, we are in a battle, and a 67-year-old man just told his burning engine that today is not its day, and that is the funniest thing we have heard this week. Admiral Pelzar, to his credit, had not lost his composure. He was a veteran. He had seen bad situations before. He was issuing orders rapidly, trying to consolidate his remaining ships, pulling the damaged vessels back toward the center of the formation, attempting to reduce the effectiveness of the encircling Allied fleet. But the math had changed. The math that had been 94.7% in our favor approximately 7 minutes ago had done something that math in my professional experience should not do. It had inverted. Not completely, not yet. We still had numerical equivalence, even with the platform losses. But the shape of this battle was not what the projections had described, and the shape of a battle matters enormously. Our ships were reacting. Their ships were executing. There is a profound difference between those two things, and that difference was Commander Calloway's doing. While our bridge was cycling through responses to things that had already happened, while Admiral Pelzar was making decisions about events that had already unfolded and could not be unfolded. Every Allied vessel in that battle was doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing, 4 minutes ago, 7 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, because it had been decided before the first rock fell. Brecken leaned over to Pelzar and said something quiet. I could not hear the words, but I did not need to. I could see the calculation in Pelzar's expression, the weight of it, the specific private arithmetic that senior commanders do when they are trying to determine whether the projected cost of victory has become greater than the projected cost of a different choice. Outside the viewport, the ISV Relentless had not moved. She was still there, still locked, still watching, still waiting to see what Admiral Pelzar decided. And somewhere on the command deck of that battered, mismatched, 60-year-old carrier that looked like it had been assembled from several different toy kits, Commander Voss Calloway was watching the same thing I was watching. A man doing math. I wrote in my field recorder. The battle for Tyron's Hold appears to be entering a critical decision point. Thurvian Command is evaluating options. Estimated decision window 2 to 4 minutes. The human commander has not moved her vessel. She is waiting, with what I can only describe as patience, for Admiral Pelzar to reach the conclusion that she appears to have already reached on his behalf. I paused again. Then I added, I believe my grandmother was right about the laughing. 15 minutes into the battle, with 4 siege platforms destroyed, 9 combat vessels taking serious fire, and the Allied coalition tightening its formation around the Thurvian fleet like something patient closing a hand, Admiral Pelzar Drovak of the Thurvian Imperial First Armada did something that he had, in 30 years of military command, never done before. He opened a direct communication channel to the ISV Relentless. The channel crackled, the familiar hiss of signal resolution, and then Commander Voss Calloway's voice, calm as it had been at the very beginning, as if the last 15 minutes had been a minor scheduling inconvenience rather than a battle. Commander Calloway, Pelzar said. Admiral Pelzar, she said. How are you finding the surprises? Pelzar closed his eyes briefly. All 4 of them. I would like, he said with great dignity, to discuss a potential ceasefire. A pause. I thought you might, she said. And I could hear very faintly at the edge of the transmission, somewhere on the bridge of the Relentless, a sound. It might have been someone trying very hard not to laugh. Stand by, Calloway said. I will have my people reduce fire. Let's talk. The communication stayed open. In the background, almost inaudible, I heard Calloway speak to someone near her. Not into the channel, just to someone on her bridge, she said quietly, matter-of-factly, with the tone of someone confirming that the oven was turned off and the shopping had been brought in. Tell Orland to put that engine fire out before we do the peace negotiations. It looks bad. Somewhere in the distance, traveling across vacuum and sensor array and communication system and 40 years of engineering that had no right still working, the ISV Grandma's Grudge creaked in what I can only describe as dignified protest. I wrote all of it down, every single word, because that is my job, and because the truth is that when someone asks me how the mightiest armada the Thurvian Empire deployed in 40 years came to be sitting in ceasefire negotiations with a human commander aboard a ship that was currently on fire in one engine and staffed by a crew that had been laughing 10 minutes ago, I want to have a very complete record. And the record, at minute 16 of the battle for Tyran's Hold, read as follows: 53 Thurvian warships, engaged, damaged, and surrounded. 14 human warships, unengaged, undamaged, and watching. 1 human commander, exactly where she had decided to be, doing exactly what she had decided to do, having decided all of it before any of us arrived. The silence had lasted 8 seconds. The answer to the silence had lasted 16 minutes, and the planet behind the Relentless, blue and green and soft and unaware, was still there. Still there, exactly as Commander Voss Calloway had decided it would be. Narrated by Gryx, 3rd rank field observer, Thurvian Imperial Fleet. Still alive. Somewhat surprised about that. Here is something nobody tells you about ceasefires. They are awkward. Not politically awkward, not strategically awkward, though they are both of those things at extraordinary levels. I mean, they are awkward in the same way that a social gathering becomes awkward when 2 people who have just been shouting at each other are asked to sit down at the same table and share refreshments. There is a period, roughly 3 to 6 minutes long, where nobody is entirely sure what their face is supposed to be doing. Admiral Pelzar's face, as the communication channel to the Relentless stayed open and the Allied coalition fleet reduced its firing to what Calloway described as maintenance levels, which apparently meant occasional targeted shots at any Thurvian vessel that moved aggressively, was doing something I had never seen it do before. It was uncertain, not afraid. Pelzar was not a being who was easily frightened, and I want to be fair to him on this point, because what happened in the first 16 minutes of the battle for Tyran's Hold would have unnerved commanders far more decorated than him. But uncertain. Yes, his expression had that specific quality of a very experienced mind encountering a variable it had not been programmed to account for. The variable in this case was Commander Voss Calloway, and the fact that she was currently asking through her communications officer whether Admiral Pelzar would prefer to conduct ceasefire discussions aboard the Sovereign Fang or aboard the Relentless, and if it was the Relentless, she would need about 20 minutes to clear the secondary conference room of some equipment we were storing there, which she did not specify, and which I found deeply interesting. What equipment? Reckon asked quietly, to nobody in particular. I would not ask, I said, from the observation gallery floor, where I had now been sitting for approximately 18 minutes and had started to feel that the floor and I had reached an understanding. Observer Gryx, Pelzar said, looking through the partition again, at what point do you intend to stand up? Shortly, Admiral, I said, I am still processing. Pelzar made a sound that communicated, very efficiently, his complete opinion of field observers as a professional category. Then he turned back to his bridge and said, we will conduct the discussion here. Tell the commander we will receive her aboard the Sovereign Fang. Sir, Gelt said carefully, if we receive her here she will see the bridge layout, the damage reports, the crew's current condition. Yes, Pelzar said. That is a great deal of information to give an opposing commander. Gelt, Pelzar said, she already knows. She has known the layout of this ship since before we arrived. She has known our damage assessments since her coalition started landing hits, and she is almost certainly aware of our crew's current condition because she engineered it. There is no information aboard this ship that Commander Calloway does not already have access to through sources I have not yet identified, so we might as well let her through the front door. This was, I reflected, the first thing Admiral Pelzar Drovak had said in the last 20 minutes that sounded genuinely wise. I stood up. It took a moment. My legs had opinions about this that I was forced to override. I straightened my recorder, checked that my field documentation device was properly active, and moved to a position near the back of the observation gallery where I would have sightlines to the bridge's main reception area. Because if Commander Voss Calloway was coming aboard this ship, I was going to document every second of it. She arrived 43 minutes after the ceasefire was called. She came with 3 people, not a security detail, not a diplomatic delegation, not the kind of formal escort that any other commander in any other civilization would bring when boarding an enemy flagship to negotiate. She brought 3 people. One was a human woman, tall and thin, carrying a data pad and wearing the expression of someone who was composing a report in their head while simultaneously listening to a conversation. I would later learn her name was Lieutenant Petra Sand, and she was Calloway's tactical planning officer. She had, according to documents I eventually obtained, not slept for 41 hours and appeared completely unbothered by this information. The second was not human. It was a Solvan, one of the 6-limbed, rust-colored beings whose vessels made up part of the Allied coalition, and this one was wearing the rank insignia of a coalition fleet coordinator. His name, in the Solvan tradition of compound identification, translated roughly as Horek of the Outer Passages, though he told everyone to call him Horek. He moved with the contained, deliberate energy of someone who was extremely competent and knew it and felt no particular need to announce it. The third was a small, extremely old human male who was wearing, I want to note this precisely, a uniform jacket that appeared to have been repaired in at least 9 different places using at least 4 different types of thread. He was walking with a slight limp that he was visibly annoyed about, and he smelled, faintly but unmistakably, of engine smoke. Captain Orlan Fitch had come in person. For reasons I could not immediately explain, his presence in the delegation made me feel, against all rational judgment, slightly better about the situation. There was something about a 67-year-old man with a smoking jacket and a limp walking onto an enemy flagship with the calm expression of someone who had been mildly inconvenienced before and had survived it every time that suggested the current situation was, perhaps, not the end of anything. Commander Calloway herself was not what I expected. I had spent 43 minutes building a mental image of her from everything I had observed, from the calm of her first transmission, from the precision of her planning, from the way she had locked onto the Sovereign Fang before the battle started and held that lock without firing, using it as a statement rather than a weapon. I had expected someone severe, someone with the cold, hard edges of someone who had planned a battle this thoroughly, this far in advance, with this little margin for sentiment. She was not severe. She was average height for a human female, with the kind of face that looked like it defaulted to a mild, open expression when nothing in particular was demanding another expression from it. Her hair was dark and cut short, practical. She was wearing a service uniform that had been pressed at some point recently but had accumulated the specific small wrinkles of someone who had been wearing it for a long time without taking it off. There was a small grease mark near her left cuff that she had clearly noticed and clearly decided was not worth addressing at this particular moment. She walked onto the bridge of the Sovereign Fang and she looked around at the crew, at the damage readouts, at the tactical displays still showing the battle's current holding pattern, and she looked at Admiral Pelzar and she said, "Thank you for seeing me, Admiral. I know this was not how you planned your morning." Pelzar stared at her. "No," he said, after a moment, "it was not." "For what it is worth," Calloway said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I have a great deal of respect for your fleet's combat response. Given that you were encountering a situation your models had not accounted for, your pilots performed very well. Whoever trained your wing commanders did excellent work." Pelzar stared at her some more. "You are," he said slowly, "complimenting my crew. In the middle of a ceasefire negotiation, after conducting an ambush against us." "It was not technically an ambush," Calloway said pleasantly. "You knew we were here. We knew you were coming. We just had more prepared than you expected. Calling it an ambush implies deception, and we never deceived you. I told you we had prepared surprises. I was very upfront about that." The silence that followed this statement was the kind of silence that exists specifically because nobody in the room can argue with what was just said. "Shall we sit down?" Calloway suggested. They sat down. I pressed my recorder to the partition glass and documented everything. The first part of the negotiation, approximately 25 minutes, covered what you would expect from a ceasefire between a retreating Imperial fleet and a defending coalition. Terms for the withdrawal of Thurvian vessels from the Tyrant system. Guarantees of non-aggression for the duration of the retreat. Arrangements for the recovery of damaged vessels on both sides. Standard language, important language, but not the language I am going to spend time on, because there is other language I need to get to. At the 26-minute mark, during a pause in the formal discussion while Lieutenant Sand was transmitting a data package to Pelzar's communications officer, Captain Orlan Fitch looked around the Sovereign Fang's command bridge with the expression of a man appraising a house he might consider buying. Nice ship, Fitch said, to no one in particular. Big, very big. The Grandma's Grudge could fit in your forward cargo bay with room left over. The Grandma's Grudge, Brecken said, apparently unable to help himself, is currently on fire. Number 2 engine, Fitch said dismissively. She does that, started doing it in 28097 during a cargo run to the Vethis belt and never really stopped. I keep telling my engineer to let me strip it out and replace it with a solid-state secondary, and my engineer keeps telling me that the day we remove that engine is the day the Grudge decides she is done. Ships are like people. They get attached to their problems. He paused thoughtfully. Actually, people are like that too. Brecken looked at this small, old, smoke-scented human and said, "You brought a ship with a recurring engine fire to a battle against the Thurvian Imperial Fleet." "She wanted to come," Fitch said simply. "I was not going to tell her no." "The ship," Brecken said, "wanted to come." "You do not have a ship, do you?" Fitch said. "Not a personal ship. A command ship, sure, but not one that is yours. It is different when it is yours." Brecken opened his mouth, and then closed it, and then did not say anything else, because there was genuinely nothing to say to that. At the 31-minute mark, with the formal terms substantially agreed upon, and Lieutenant Sond cross-referencing language in the digital agreement with the focused energy of someone who has read 17 similar documents and caught errors in 15 of them, Pelzar did something I had been waiting for. He asked the question. "Commander," he said, "I need to understand something, not for the negotiation, for myself." "How long?" Calloway looked at him steadily. "Admiral, how long did you spend planning this?" Pelzar said. "The asteroid field positioning, the mass driver conversions, the coalition assembly, the approach vector calculations that put those haulers above our fleet's expected formation position, the radio silence protocols, the pre-arranged maneuver sequences that meant 60 ships from 6 different species could coordinate a battle without a single real-time communication." He paused. "How long?" Calloway was quiet for a moment. "The Thurvian Empire," she said, "declared the human territories as territories of interest under the expansion mandate 14 months ago. We received that declaration through official channels. Most people in command positions took it as a bureaucratic formality, a preliminary step, something that happens before the real conversations start." She looked at Pelzar carefully. "I did not take it that way." "You began planning 14 months ago," Pelzar said. "I began making calls 14 months ago," Calloway said. "The planning took time. Getting the Solvan to agree to participate took 4 months. The Cathari required 6 meetings and a demonstration that we were serious. The Dravkon were the most difficult because they have not trusted any outside alliance since the Moroccan campaigns, and they had reasons not to trust human-led initiatives specifically. That took 8 months of personal communication between me and their fleet council." She said this matter-of-factly, with no particular pride in it, the way someone might describe a lengthy but necessary bureaucratic process. "The mass driver conversions were my engineer's idea, Commander Lyle Webb, ISV Copper Dawn. He drew up the concept in about 3 hours on a napkin, and then we spent 2 months sourcing the right materials without attracting attention." "On a napkin," Pelzar said. "He is very talented," Calloway said. "The cold-running protocol for the asteroid field," Brecken said, leaning forward. "That requires precise temperature management across 46 vessels. Any miscalculation and the heat bleed would have been detectable." "It was Horek's idea," Calloway said, nodding toward the Solvan Coalition coordinator. "Solvan vessels run cold as a standard design feature. They adapted the protocol for the human ships and the Cathari fighters. The Dravkon cruisers were the biggest challenge. Their reactor cores run hot by nature. Horek's team spent 3 weeks developing insulation casings that could contain the heat signature without compromising the crew's life support." Horek, who had been listening to this with the patient expression of someone accustomed to other people marveling at his work, said simply, "It was an engineering problem. Engineering problems have solutions." "And the maneuver sequences," Pelzar said. "The pre-planned battle formations. Without real-time communication, 60 ships maintained coordinated tactical behavior for the entirety of the engagement." "That part was not mine," Calloway said. "That was the crew's. We ran 12 drills in the asteroid field during the 6 days we were waiting. No radio, no signals, pilots communicating through visual markers and pre-memorized patterns. 12 drills, different scenarios, different variables. By the time you arrived, everyone knew the framework well enough to adapt within it independently. I told them, when the silence comes, trust the framework. They did. You trusted 60 ships of 6 species to follow a battle plan from memory, Pelzar said, because you had run 12 practice drills in an asteroid field. And because they trusted me to have made a good plan, Calloway said quietly, which is not something I take lightly. When someone trusts you to have planned well, you plan very, very carefully. Pelzar was quiet for a long time. The bridge of the Sovereign Fang, which had in the last hour gone from a command center managing the worst military surprise in Thurvian recent history to a ceasefire negotiating room with a 67-year-old human sitting in a chair smelling of engine smoke and making philosophical points about the relationship between ships and their owners, was very still. There is something else I need to understand, Pelzar said, the direct weapons lock. From the beginning, the Relentless was targeted on this ship from the moment we arrived. Yes, Calloway said. Why? Calloway considered this question for a moment, not as if she did not know the answer, as if she was deciding which part of the answer to give first. When a fleet has a flagship, she said, it has a command center. Decisions flow from that center. If the command center makes a decision that cannot be undone, then the battle becomes something different, something that cannot be resolved at a table. She looked at Pelzar directly. I was not going to let this battle become something that cannot be resolved at a table. The lock was a message. It said whatever you decide to do next, you decide knowing that I am watching, and that some decisions end conversations permanently. You were preventing us from targeting the civilian population, Pelzar said. I was preventing anyone from making a decision they could not come back from, Calloway said. Including you. You have a reputation, Admiral Pelzar. You have won 5 wars. In all 5 of them, the post-war records show that you negotiated the terms of surrender personally. You did not delegate it. You sat down with the people you had defeated, and you worked out the terms. That is not the behavior of someone who wants permanent enemies. I was giving you the space to be that person. The silence after this was different from the previous silences. This silence was not the silence of shock, or of tactical recalculation, or of beings trying to process something unexpected. This was the silence of a man who had just been told something about himself that he had never heard stated aloud before, and who was sitting with the weight of it. You studied me, Pelzar said. I studied everything I could find, Calloway said. About the fleet, about the commanders, about the Empire's decision-making patterns. I needed to know not just what your military was capable of, but what choices would be available to you when things did not go as planned. I needed to know if you were someone who escalates when surprised, or someone who recalibrates. A slight pause. You recalibrate. That was important. Because if I escalated, then the morning would have ended differently, Calloway said simply, and left it there. Fitch, who had been quietly examining a seam in his jacket where one of the repairs was beginning to come apart again, said without looking up, She spent 6 weeks on your psychological profile alone, Admiral. 6 weeks. I told her it was probably overkill. She told me that if it was overkill we would never know, and if it was not we would be very glad she did it. He found the loose thread, examined it, and appeared to decide the jacket could hold together a little longer. She was right, obviously. She usually is. It is somewhat exhausting. Fitch, Calloway said mildly. I am being complimentary, Fitch said. You are also being a great deal of information, Calloway said. I have been flying a ship with a burning engine for 40 years, Fitch said. I have earned the right to occasionally be a great deal of information. Calloway looked at Pelzar with an expression that said, very clearly, I know. I have been managing this for years. And then something happened on her face that was, I think, as close to a genuine unguarded moment as Commander Voss Calloway allowed herself in professional settings. A very brief, very real smile. She said. He also volunteered for the cold running period in the asteroid field knowing his engine was at risk. I told him he did not have to. He said, and I am quoting this accurately, Voss, I have been on the wrong side of every smart plan you have ever made, and it has never killed me yet. I am not starting now. The Grudge held her heat fine, Fitch confirmed. Mostly, Horex said, in the tone of someone who had spent 6 days in close quarters with a ship whose heat management had been described as mostly fine. I wrote all of this in my field recorder. Every word, every pause, every sidelong look between Calloway and Fitch that communicated a friendship forged out of long professional history and mutual understanding and the specific deep trust that comes from having sat quietly together in the dark, waiting for a thing that might not go well and deciding to wait anyway. Pelzar drew himself up. He was a large being, Admiral Pelzar Drovak. 4 primary arms, broad across the chest, the kind of physical presence that had served him well in command. He had presence in the way that certain beings have presence, like gravity. But he was sitting across from Commander Voss Calloway, and I noticed, with professional interest, that the gravity in the room was coming from her side of the table. I will need to report this to the Imperial Council, Pelzar said. The outcome, the terms. I know, Calloway said. They will not be pleased. I imagine not. There will be pressure to return, to come back with a larger fleet, to treat this as a temporary setback rather than a policy failure. Calloway nodded slowly. And what will you tell them? Pelzar was quiet for a moment. That is what I need to decide, he said. But I am curious, Commander. You planned for the possibility of this conversation. You planned for the possibility that I would recalibrate rather than escalate. What did you plan to ask me? If we reached this point, what did you want from me? Calloway folded her hands on the table. I want you to tell the Council the truth, she said. Not the strategic version. Not the version that softens the losses or reframes the outcome as a temporary position. The actual truth, that you came here with 80 warships and 14 months of intelligence preparation and a 94.7% casualty projection on our side, and that it did not go that way. Not because we got lucky, not because of terrain or weather or any factor outside of human and coalition planning, because we knew you were coming, because we prepared, because we will always prepare. Because every species that has ever told us to calculate our odds and surrender has discovered that we do not calculate odds the way other species do. How do you calculate odds? Pelzar asked. Calloway looked at him very steadily. We calculate what is possible, she said, not what is probable, not what the models suggest. We look at the gap between what is probable and what is possible, and we work in that gap, because that gap is where everything happens. All of history is in that gap. Every unexpected thing that ever changed the direction of anything, it happened in that gap. We live there. It is not comfortable, and it is not guaranteed, and we lose sometimes, badly, and it costs us enormously. But we are very, very experienced at being in that gap. Pelzar stared at her. Tell the Council, Calloway said, that if they return, we will do this again. Differently, because it will have to be different, but again. And after that again. Not because we enjoy it, not because we are eager for it, but because Tyrant's Hold has 800,000 people living on it, and we gave them our word, and we do not break our word because the math got uncomfortable. The bridge of the Sovereign Fang was absolutely still. Even the ventilation seemed to have paused. Even the distant background hum of the ship's power systems seemed to have dropped to a lower register, as if the ship itself understood that something was being said that deserved the courtesy of silence. Pelzar said, and if I tell them that? If I report this accurately, all of it, the planning, the coalition, the gap between probable and possible, do you believe the Council will listen? No, Calloway said without hesitation. Not all of them. Not immediately. But some of them will, and those are the ones I need you to make sure hear it directly, because the alternative is that they send another fleet, and we do this again, and the cost goes up for everyone, and I would genuinely prefer not to spend another 14 months planning a battle. I have a great deal of other things I would like to be doing. A short pause. Such as? Pelzar asked, and it was a genuine question, I think, not a strategic one. The question of a being trying to understand a being. My chief engineer, Commander Webb, has been working on a theoretical update to our jump corridor mapping for 6 years, Calloway said. It is sitting in a drawer because every time he is about to finish it, something else comes up. I would like to give him 6 months where nothing comes up. He deserves to finish it. A brief pause. And Orlan has been threatening to overhaul the Grudge's entire secondary propulsion system for 2 decades, and I would like to be there when that happens, because I have a significant side bet with Horak about whether the number 2 engine starts burning again within 48 hours of the overhaul being completed. It will not burn, Fitch said firmly. I have deep confidence in you, Calloway said, and a moderate financial position in the other outcome. Fitch made a sound that was entirely dignified and not at all the sound of a man being deeply disrespected by someone he trusted completely. He straightened his repaired jacket. Horak made a sound that in Solvan expresses restrained amusement and agreement with an ongoing joke. And Admiral Pelzar Drovak, 5-war veteran, commander of the Imperial First Armada, the man who had arrived at Tyrant's Hold this morning with 80 warships and the confidence of someone doing simple arithmetic, made a sound that I, Gryx, third-rank field observer with 22 years of documented experience across 6 conflicts, had never once heard come from a Thurvian commander in a professional military setting. He laughed. Not a full, extended laugh, Not the kind that my grandmother had described watching in the Human Soldiers. A short single sound, the kind that escapes before the professional training can catch it. But genuine, authentic. The sound of a mind encountering something so precisely, perfectly itself that no other response is appropriate. He composed himself quickly. He was after all still a Thurvian admiral, and there were standards. But he had laughed, and everyone in the room had heard it, and I had written it down immediately, in full detail, because that was my job, and because that sound was in my professional estimation worth documenting. I will speak to the council, Pelzar said, accurately, completely. I cannot guarantee the outcome. I know, Calloway said, but you will try. Yes, Pelzar said, I will try. The formal ceasefire agreement was signed 47 minutes after Commander Calloway boarded the Sovereign Fang. The signatures were Admiral Pelzar Drovac for the Thurvian Imperial First Armada, Commander Voss Calloway for the Tyran Defense Coalition, Harek of the Outer Passages for the Solvan Free State, and, because he had been sitting there the whole time and Calloway apparently felt it would be rude not to include him, Captain Orlan Fitch of the ISV Grandma's Grudge, representing himself and his ship, and the general principle that some things keep working long past the point where they should have stopped. The withdrawal of the Thurvian fleet from the Tyran system took 6 hours. I watched it from the observation gallery, 53 warships plus the surviving siege platforms moving through the jump corridor in an orderly sequence supervised by the coalition fleet that had, by now, dropped the maintenance-level firing and settled into a watchful, professional formation that said, "We are not hostile, we are not careless, and we have not forgotten how today went." As each Thurvian ship cleared the system boundary and prepared to jump, I made a note in my field recorder. Names, registry numbers, reported damage status. It is not exciting work, but it is necessary work. Someone has to count the ships going home. When the Sovereign Fang, last in the withdrawal sequence as protocol required for the command vessel, reached the jump corridor boundary, I put down my recorder for a moment. Through the viewport, getting smaller as we moved away from Tyran's hold but still clearly visible, was the ISV Relentless, unmoving, still holding the same position it had held since this morning began. The battered carrier with the mismatched hull plates, the 60-year-old bones, the crew that had been laughing during a battle, and the commander who had been aiming at us since the moment we arrived and had chosen every second of the battle not to fire. Beside the Relentless, smaller but unmistakable, was the ISV Grandma's Grudge. I noticed, as the distance grew, that there was a faint smear of light near the Grudge's secondary engine housing. Not a fire, more of a glow, the kind of glow that an engine makes when it is warm and running and technically contained but maintaining its right to have opinions about the situation. I picked up my recorder. I wrote, "The battle for Tyran's hold ended at 1432 hours, ship standard. Total engagement duration 11 hours including ceasefire proceedings. Thurvian losses, 4 siege platforms destroyed, 7 combat vessels critically damaged, 11 combat vessels sustaining significant damage, 0 total losses of crewed vessels. Coalition losses, 4 vessels sustaining minor to moderate damage. ISV Grandma's Grudge. Number 2 engine still technically on fire, secondary definition of fire currently under negotiation between Captain Fitch and his engineering team." I paused. Then I wrote, "Personal observation, appended to the official record. In 22 years of field documentation across 6 conflicts, I have observed the following consistent truth. Wars are often decided by numbers, fleet sizes, weapon yields, probability projections, casualty estimates. The numbers matter. I will not pretend they do not. But occasionally, and I am documenting this specifically because it is rare enough to warrant documentation, a battle is decided by something the numbers cannot capture. By the difference between a fleet that is reacting to events and a fleet that already knew what was going to happen and simply waited for it. By the difference between ships that need to talk to each other to coordinate and ships that already said everything they needed to say before the silence started. By the difference between a commander who tells her people trust the plan and a commander who has earned the kind of trust that makes silence feel like safety rather than isolation. Admiral Pelzar arrived at Tyran's hold this morning certain that the numbers would decide the outcome. Commander Calloway had decided the outcome 14 months ago. The numbers were almost incidental. I looked at the Relentless one more time, now small enough to be a bright point against the blue-green glow of the planet behind it. Then I wrote the last line of my field report for the Battle of Tyran's Hold. What Commander Calloway said to Admiral Pelzar this afternoon in the formal ceasefire record is documented in the preceding pages. what she said to him as he left, quietly, at the door of the conference room, in a voice not intended for recording but recorded nonetheless by virtue of my job and my proximity and the very good acoustics of Thurvian flagship corridors, was this: "Admiral, take care of your people. That is all any of us are actually doing out here." Pelzar stopped walking for 1 full second when she said it. Then he continued through the door without responding. But Tevrak, who was walking directly behind him, and who has very good observational instincts for someone whose primary job is communications, told me afterward, in the officers' mess, over a cup of something warm and not particularly pleasant, that Pelzar's posture changed after that moment. That something in how he was carrying himself was different, less the posture of someone managing a defeat, more the posture of someone who had been reminded of something they had known for a long time and had perhaps not thought about recently enough. I put the recorder away. The Sovereign Fang completed its jump corridor entry. The stars shifted. Tyron's hold dissolved behind us into the particular absolute darkness of faster-than-light travel, and somewhere behind us, receding into a system that was keeping its planet, an old ship with a recurring engine fire settled back into the defensive formation it had held all morning. Still there. Just as decided. Now, I am Gryx, third-rank field observer. It is my professional responsibility to present information without personal editorial. I am aware that I have not entirely succeeded at this in the preceding document, and I want to note for the record that I regret nothing. I submitted my field report to the Thurvian Imperial Intelligence Archive the morning after the battle. 40 pages, full documentation. Every name, every moment, every word spoken, and some that were not intended to be spoken but ended up near my recorder anyway. I included the personal note about my grandmother. I included the section about the number 2 engine. I included Orlin Fitch's statement about ships getting attached to their problems, because it was accurate, and because I felt it deserved to be in an official document. 3 weeks later, I was informed that my field report had been classified at the highest level of Imperial intelligence restriction. 6 weeks after that, I was informed that Admiral Pelzar had presented an accurate, complete account of the Battle of Tyron's Hold to the Imperial Council. I do not know what happened in that room. The Council's proceedings are not available to field observers, but the Thurvian Empire did not return to the Tyron system. The expansion mandate declaration against the human territories was, after 12 weeks of deliberation, reclassified as suspended pending further strategic assessment, which is bureaucratic language for, "We have decided, collectively, to think about this more carefully before trying it again." The Imperial Council does not issue public statements about things it has decided not to do, so there was no formal announcement, but the suspension was real. I have the documentation. It is in a file. The file is classified. I am telling you about it anyway, because I am a field observer and the truth of events is my professional obligation, and also because I am retired now, and retirement has clarified my relationship with certain classification protocols. Last year I received, through a routing I will not specify, a data file containing a single image, no text, no message, just an image. It was a photograph of a ship, taken from the exterior somewhere in open space. A small ship, old, roughly half of its hull plating in visibly different materials from the other half, and near the secondary engine housing, just visible if you knew what you were looking at, was a faint warm glow. Number 2 engine, still going. I showed it to my grandmother. She is very old now. She has been very old for a long time, in the way that certain people manage to be through sheer force of opinion. She looked at the photograph for a while, then she looked at me. "You went and documented the laughing ones," she said. "Yes," I said. And you were right," I said, "about all of it." She made a sound that in our language means obviously but carries the particular warmth of a person who is glad to be right about something they would have preferred to be wrong about. She pointed at the glow near the engine housing. "That thing is never going to stop burning," she said. "No," I said, "I do not think it is." She handed the photograph back to me and settled into her chair with the satisfied air of someone who has been keeping 3 security locks on her door for 40 years for excellent reasons that have now been fully confirmed. Outside her window, somewhere very far away, the Tyren system turned slowly around its star. 800,000 people who grew food and raised livestock and had, on one very specific morning, been protected by 14 warships and 60 allies, and 4 converted cargo ships and 1 commander who had decided the outcome 14 months before anyone arrived, went about their days without knowing most of the specifics. They knew they were still there. They knew the planet was still theirs. They knew, because she had told them she would, and she had, that Commander Voss Calloway had kept her word. The rest of it, the asteroid field, the mass drivers, the 6-week psychological study of an Imperial Admiral, the 6 days of cold silence and 12 practice drills, the number 2 engine of the ISV Grandma's Grudge maintaining its unbroken record of being technically but contentiously on fire. They knew none of that. They just knew the sky was still theirs. And that, I wrote, in the very last line of the very last addendum I ever attached to the field report for the Battle of Tyrant's Hold, is what all of it was actually for.